Landmines are hidden killers waiting in ambush. These brutal weapons can explode with a force that spreads shrapnel to a 50-meter lethal range in an instant, killing or maiming anyone in its path. The men who must find and disarm these deadly weapons know that one step can mean the difference between life and death. Meet the heroes who tread on dangerous ground, on Minesweepers, next on Dangerous Missions. Mines have been a part of the technology of war for over 100 years. An explosive charge that can be buried and then detonated on contact. Mines planted in a minefield are an inexpensive, effective, and long-term killing delivery system. For the military, mines perform a necessary tactical function. These lethal weapons laid in a specific area are used as obstacles or barriers to an advancing force.
The real danger is you don't know when or where you're going to encounter mines on the battlefield. Couple that with the enemy is usually out there waiting for you to stumble into his minefield, and so you really become a target.
A minefield is not only an obstacle and an opportunity for an ambush, but it protects the front line. Mines are treacherous snares for the opposing force. The footfall of a marching soldier, the weight of a rolling tank, each can detonate these hidden killers as an enemy enters the defensive perimeter.
Anti-tank mines often require significant pressure over them to detonate, so you and I could stand on them and jump on some anti-tank mines, nothing would happen. Because we don't weigh the tons that it would require. Anti-personnel mines, on the other hand, can be detonated by just a fraction of an ounce.
Trained to provide mobility support, combat engineers also create obstacles for the enemy. Laid out as barriers, minefields are usually planted in a pattern of one anti-tank mine and 2 anti-personnel mines per square yard. The area actually covered depends on the specific battle or frontline needs. The minefield is often then surrounded with concertina, or barbed wire, to reinforce the barrier. The combat engineer's mission is to not only make the minefield a lethal barrier, but to outwit the opposing force.
The main part of being engineers and to lay minefields is to try and confuse the enemy and make their job as difficult as possible. And we catch him out by surprise by being a little bit sneaky. And for instance, we can do that by laying mines which are attached to other mines, so that he lifts one mine out of the ground successfully. He then sets off 2 or 3 behind him in amongst his mates.
It is the dedicated ingenuity of combat engineers who make the menace of mines even more dangerous by the cunning way they are laid. From the battlefields of war to the countryside of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the job of neutralizing their lethal capability is an act of heroism.
It's not a matter of will we have accent, it's a matter of when we're gonna have it. Because this is that kind of job.
In one of the ironies of war, combat engineers lay mines. They are also the battalion that must breach or clear a safe path through an enemy's minefield. Today, the most commonly used neutralizing system in the arsenal of the American military is the MICLIC, or Mine-Clearing Line-Induced Charge. A rocket containing 2,000 pounds of explosives is launched over an enemy's minefield. It is connected by a detonation cord to a remote initiating vehicle. Once over the minefield, the charge is detonated and it explodes the laid mines and clears a path of about 10 meters. But in the expediency of war, combat engineers can be called to breach a minefield using the high-risk hand-in-breech method. It is only employed when extreme speed and the rapid movement of forces is critical to the mission. At Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, Army combat engineers train for the eventuality of just such a mission. Using the hand-in-breech method, combat engineers must crack through a minefield carrying what they need to get the job done. The first step in this high-risk mission is to suppress both direct and artillery fire from the enemy waiting in ambush around the minefield.
We let what we call suppressive fire on the enemy position to try to keep his head down so that he doesn't have clear shots at us while we come up and execute the breach drill.
Once the enemy fire is suppressed, smoke is generated to obscure the activities of the combat engineers. A single soldier carrying a grappling hook and wire cutters jumps from the armored personnel vehicle. Racing to avoid becoming a target, he runs to the concertina wire barrier. The combat engineer uses the grappling hook to catch any tripwires that are often placed throughout the razor-sharp wire. Using his wire cutters, he makes an opening in the barrier. The soldier uses his grappling hook and rope to continue to check the minefield itself for tripwires. Once this first soldier completes his job, alone and under fire, he is followed by 4 others who complete the next step, the reduction of the obstacle. Metal tubes packed with 20 pounds of explosives called Bangalore torpedoes are carried into the minefield. 2 more soldiers begin placing the C4 charges on any mines they see in a 10-meter width. Anti-tank mines are usually put in place quickly by an enemy and can be detected visually.
And then the last thing you're going to see is them setting up the initiating system. They'll hook in that blasting cap into that cord, and then they'll run the initiating system back to their armored personnel carrier. They'll button up, lock up inside there, and they'll pull that M81 fuse igniter, and that'll set everything off.
In combat conditions, these brave soldiers race through a live minefield against spitting bullets and whistling artillery fire. This tactic is commonly done under the cover of night and completed in darkness, punctured only by the light of a bursting shell.
It's a risky operation, first of all, because of the minefield itself. You have mines, explosives, potentially booby traps, anti-personnel mines. So the second risk that we face is the enemy on the far side of the obstacle who's covering the obstacle, and he'll be trying to place direct fire on us while we're trying to reduce it. And then the third risk that we face comes from enemy artillery. And if we're attempting to breach it, they know where we're at. And so it's very easy for them to put indirect fire on us while we are trying to place a breach.
It is a high-stakes gamble of outmaneuvering and defeating an unseen enemy. Working as a team, combat engineers face a minefield and charge through it, knowing the risks. Although mines have been a prolific weapon of war in the 20th century, their use actually started decades earlier. The American Civil War saw the first use of mines in combat. A soldier would improvise a mine by burying a pile of stones with a small explosive charge just below the surface of the ground. An oncoming force would detonate the mine on contact. These early mines were called earthen torpedoes.
And even then, they were rarely used institutionally. They were used by individuals as infernal machines and condemned broadly by everybody involved because they were considered to be so inappropriate, such a cowardly form of war.
One gruesome means of detection was the body of a dead soldier. The only other means of detecting these hidden torpedoes or mines is one still used today.
In the early days, even back to the Civil War and prior to that, Detection was largely by seeing the disturbed ground. You actually saw where the ground was turned up. You then had a suspicion that there would be something under there.
The development of weapons of war accelerated in the industrial age just prior to World War I. Machine guns and barbed wire helped to transform World War I into a relatively static war fought in the trenches. Since early anti-tank mines were most effective in a mobile conflict where the front line shifted, they were not yet completely incorporated into the weaponry of war. But all that changed in the years preceding World War II.
Germany and the Soviet Union were very interested in the development of anti-tank mines because of the advent of armor. And the Germans, certainly, the anti-personnel mine. Germany always perceived that it would fight probably outnumbered. So anything that they could come up with to equalize the forces, such as an anti-personnel mine, they worked on.
World War II became a much more mobile war, and we were rapidly moving across the battlefield, and so mines are easily deployable.
With the development of effective anti-tank mines like the Teller mine and anti-personnel mines like the Shoe mine, World War II put these weapons firmly in the lexicon of every arsenal. With the proliferation of mines surrounding the front, combat engineers who planted their own mines also had to remove the enemy's mines. After a visual check, every engineer used the basic tools of metal probes or bayonets to feel the ground, and metal or mine detectors that used magnetic resonance to indicate the presence of metal. The term Minesweeper came into the jargon of the military as the mine detector swept over an area. Using either method made combat engineers easy targets.
Mine detection was a very dangerous operation. First of all, if your probe missed the mine, you might not miss the mine. If your detector did not find it, you possibly could find the mine. At the same time, if you are discovered, the enemy would have weapons fire, and in some instances artillery fire, planned on their own minefields.
That's where your danger comes in, this overhead fire, especially them doggone mortars. The bigger ones, like the 105 millimeter mortar, you might hear that thing going off way back, and you know it's coming. You know, you hear it coming there, so you hit cover or something like that. And that's, well, it'll chew you up, that darn shrapnel from that stuff. But otherwise, you just keep going.
The infantry provided cover fire, while the engineers raced as quickly as possible through the field with their probes and metal detectors.
The engineer soldiers are one of the few soldiers in the military that mostly have to do their work standing up. They don't have any weapons with them. And you can put mines in or take them out with the weapons hanging on you and stuff like that. You can't stop, so you've got to figure on somebody else to give you the fire support.
In the noise, chaos, and trauma of combat, engineers had to remain absolutely focused on the delicate job of sensing a mine by the soft pressure of a probe or the quiet beeping of a detector. The slightest mistake, like hitting a tripwire or too much pressure from a probe, would be enough to detonate an explosion capable of killing.
When they're wounded, they're wounded pretty bad, but they're still surviving. Now, some of them, when they're wounded like that, they're in terrible darn pain. They're shrieking at a terrible pitch. I mean, you can't even imitate it hardly. And I've seen some of them laying there, and they know they're bleeding to death, and they're just talking as calm as can be, and away they go.
The danger was not only in the detection of mines, but in neutralizing their threat once they were located. When possible, they were marked and avoided. But often they had to be disarmed by carefully cutting the wires connected to the fuse, or detonating it in place, or even removing it. all extremely risky operations exposing the soldier to enemy fire. For the most part, the risks taken by combat engineers in World War II and in the subsequent wars at the end of the 20th century only escalated. While the basic techniques of mine detection and neutralization remained the same, mine technology improved dramatically. In particular, the Vietnam War saw the use of the Claymore mine that could detonate in a specific direction, and scatterable mines that were dropped from a plane but only detonated on contact from an advancing force. With every advance in landmine technology, death followed danger as the combat engineer confronted a more resourceful and mortal enemy. With the widespread use of mines, millions still buried in former battlefields were left behind. These insidious weapons kill thousands of innocent civilians. Today, in humanitarian demining or neutralizing mines after a conflict, it requires a deminer to literally be face to face with his potential killer. With every major conflict since World War II, the use of mines has spread throughout the world. Some estimates place the number of buried landmines at a staggering 100 million. An end to a war does not stop the killing capabilities of mines.
It's a tragic reality that mines are mindless. They'll destroy whoever or whatever comes close.
In 1991, after the communist regime fell in what was Yugoslavia, a political vacuum opened the way for a violent civil war. The city of Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina became a battlefield where the predominantly Muslim community fought the Bosnian Serb army intent on ethnic cleansing. The self-mutilation of a civil war destroyed the once beautiful city.
There was a lot of shooting from snipers from these hills downtown, and people were getting injured, and people had to run to certain open spaces, and that's why this alley or part of the town was called Sniper Alley, because there was constant fire from snipers. But basically whole Sarajevo was Sniper Alley most of the time.
As the forces continually won and lost ground, front lines were shifting and mines were planted everywhere. While most armies map their minefields, often records are lost or incomplete. 1 million mines were laid in Bosnia-Herzegovina alone. Intact military records show the relative location of 600,000. The sites for 280,000 mines are still unaccounted for. The Mine Action Center in Sarajevo is charged with the Herculean task of coordinating the humanitarian demining program in Bosnia. In addition to the military, international organizations like the United Nations and non-governmental agencies like the Norwegian People's Aid participate in the clearing of landmines. The goal of military mine breaching is to get troops and armored vehicles through a cleared lane in a minefield as fast as possible. But in humanitarian demining, the mission is to clear all the mines from a field as safely as possible.
The war stopped about 5 years ago. It was just the active shooting that stopped. The legacy is still there, not only in form of mines and the mine accidents that happens. It is also a problem that the mines are stopping the development of this country. And this kills a lot of the spirit among the population and the will to actually do and achieve something, because everything is in a depression after a war.
It is critical to the survival and rejuvenation of a country to clear all the mines. The economy can't move forward if minefields block the resettlement of the people and the ability to do commerce. In Sarajevo, the mines used were primarily anti-personnel mines that now lay in rubble. in grassy fields, and in the trenches of the front line. These deadly traps are planted and hidden everywhere. To be visible to camera, these diffused mines were planted above ground. Even then, these discreet and lethal mines are difficult to see in the destruction and overgrowth. The most common anti-personnel mine found in Sarajevo is the prom mine.
Most dangerous anti-personnel mine in Bosnia can be activated in two ways. If there's a physical movement of the tripwire, fuse will activate. And second way that can be activated is to step on it. In both cases, fuse will initiate first charge that will send the prom out of the ground. In the case of PMA-1, up to 80 centimeters from the ground. And then after 80 centimeters, main detonation will happen. Inside of this mine is 400 grams of TNT. It's very strong mine. Little range goes all the way up to 50 meters.
To ensure the safety of the miners in the face of these horrific mines, there is a strict SOP, or standard operating procedure, detailing each part of the process. The first step is the Level 1 survey. If available, using military records or a local individual who knows the area, a deminer tries to locate possible minefields. Once a minefield has been marked out, several two-man teams of deminers with a supervisor start the slow and painstaking process of searching for mines. Working on a 1-meter grid pattern, a safe lane or area is cleared so that men and equipment can move through. The clearing process uses the same tools as those in World War II. A metal or mine detector, a metal prod, and garden tools to clear away vegetation. To clear a meter square area, a deminer wearing protective clothing and a face shield visually checks the area. He then tests the area for any tripwires. In this simulation, the deminer feels a slight tug. He stops immediately. A supervisor takes over and clears the ground around the wire. The fuse of a prom mine is exposed. The slightest pressure on the tripwire would have detonated it, killing anyone within 50 meters. If there are no tripwires, a deminer begins the methodical task of using a metal prod to gently probe 10 centimeters beneath the surface. A deminer must probe 2,000 times per square meter to be certain the area is clear of mines.
It's physically hard to push it into the ground and to get some depth of it. And of course you can't push it too hard either, because then you might set off a mine. One rule that we got is that you never prod with more than 30 degrees of angle with a prod, and that's so that you shouldn't push the top of a mine with your prodder, as you then might set it off. It's a lot better to hit the edge of the mine. And in the training we use real mines that have been disarmed, so that you learn how it feels when you strike a mine compared to a battery, for example.
Depending on the surface of the ground, a metal detector can be used with a prod to scan for a mine, or after, to check on any hit made by prodding. A deminer will sweep the area slowly at 5 centimeters above the surface, 3 times. The specific beeps will alert a deminer to a mine, and not just the metal content of the soil or a metal fragment. In a second simulation, a deminer finds a PMA-2 mine with an explosive force of 45 grams of TNT. He calls his supervisor, who then secures the area, and like all mines found in humanitarian demining, it is safely detonated by placing a small C4 charge on the mine and exploding it in place. A deminer can only do this highly concentrated work for a limited time. The second man on the team will relieve him regularly so that he can relax in a rest area. Mines are dangerous, but it is the tedium of the job that can ultimately kill.
You can go on for a week or a month even without finding a single mine, and then it's a distinct risk that you start to be sloppy. And this is something that becomes a hazard after a number of months or years, that you actually start disregarding the danger of it. You have to have constant supervision on the area, someone that's on your back all the time, making sure that you follow the procedures.
Deviating from procedures, being too accustomed to the danger, or the random instability of the mines themselves can cause a simple but deadly mistake.
Demining is a very slow process. It doesn't have to be so dangerous if you follow the rules, but then there's always percent that can cause an accident. For example, mine was moved because of something, and then it's like safe angle of approach to the mine is not safe angle anymore. Then it becomes dangerous angle, and then accident can happen, and accidents happen. Deminers get injured, deminers die.
In Bosnia, approximately 1,000 deminers have accepted the risks on a daily basis. In 4 years, 30 have been killed clearing 120,000 mines, or only 12% of the estimated total. It is a demanding procedure with an unpredictable and relentless enemy. In humanitarian demining, organizations like Norwegian People's Aid recruit former soldiers to demine in their own country. These men, and in some cases women, have experienced the risks of walking into a minefield. Slatko Vasilik was a soldier in the Bosnian army. One of his responsibilities was to not only breach minefields, but also to plant mines during combat. Under the cover of darkness, Vasilik, with other engineers, would sneak behind enemy lines to lay the mines.
When we laid the mines, we had to wait for the last soldier to lay his mine in place. Then on a given signal, we inserted the fuses into the mines. Then again, on a given signal, we buried the mines. And with the same sign, we started to retreat one by one back behind our front lines.
After the war, Vasilik became a deminer and was retrained in the standard operating procedures of humanitarian demining.
I chose this job primarily because it was I who laid the mines. It was I who completed the training and gained the experience during the war. And I thought it necessary that such people should continue to do this after the war.
Familiar with the hazards of mines, Vasilik was very experienced and competent. But working in minefields carries risks, no matter how careful or experienced a deminer is. On a routine survey, Vasilik and his partner were trying to determine the extent of a minefield. On their way out of the area, Vasilik took a step on a different path than the one they walked in on.
And after several steps, I stepped on the mine. I can only... What is the use of talking now? I was looking at the very spot where I was going to step with my very own eyes, and I did step, because I was sure that there was no mine there. but it was the very spot. I think that one can never be 100% sure, but look what happened to me. I stepped on the PMA-3 mine, which consists of 35 grams of explosives, and I lost my foot. I planted those mines during the war.
Norwegian's People's Aid gave Vasilik a prosthesis and rehabilitation. 6 months after the accident, he is back out in the minefields supervising other deminers.
No, I never regretted joining the work of deminers. Of course, I regret losing my foot. But when I think of the evil that mines do, I believe that the demining job can save the lives of many children and other people. This is why I think there is meaning in what I do, not only in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but also other countries. And that is why I believe this is a humane job.
Deminers do their dangerous work for many reasons. In a country just ravaged by war, former soldiers find a rare, well-paying job as a deminer. But when one of their own is injured, the reality of the risk is underlined in the starkest terms.
Supervisor.
Maybe sometimes they regret they joined this business. But then tomorrow they go back to their jobs again. You can say that they are heroes in one way because they take this risk that it's not enough paid. But it can never be paid.
Vasilik was a salaried deminer, but there are others who volunteer to take on the risks inherent in every mined country. Bent Olsen, a captain in the Swedish Army, worked for the humanitarian organization HELP, also doing demining and reconstruction in Sarajevo.
Bent Olsen was what you would call a true humanitarian. He had talked to colleagues in Norwegian People's Aid and found that there was a way in which he could continue doing his work for the people in the country. He was also very much a man's man, and demining is very much a man's world.
Late in August of 2000, 2 fishermen had ventured into a mined area near a tunnel. They were killed by anti-personnel mines that had been tripwired in a configuration of connecting mines called a spider's web. Not assigned to the task, Olsen volunteered to help retrieve the bodies. A safe lane was cleared and the first body removed. The second fisherman had managed to crawl out of the tunnel before dying. When they went to retrieve the second body, they decided to lift the body out.
Ben, being Bent, said, "Yeah, I'll give you a hand." And as they lifted the body, a second mine jumped, a prom mine again, and detonated. And they were killed instantaneously.
It was another shocking reminder of the volatility and indiscriminate cruelty of mines.
I don't know how many other mines, jumping mines, are in that tunnel still today, but it was a seriously mine-contaminated area. It could be best described as being an evil place. Whoever laid it out, if they're alive today, have the satisfaction knowing that their trap worked because it killed 5 people.
The deaths deeply affected the close-knit community of humanitarian deminers in Sarajevo.
It was devastating for whole demining community, if I can say, in Sarajevo, because many people knew him and knew what kind of person he was. What made things more difficult for all us. Because you always think there is some justice on this planet when you think like good people shouldn't die.
He had a tradition when he would come to the Mine Action Centre where we generally gathered on a Friday evening. He'd buy a case of beer, just say, put a beer on the table and say, right, everyone enjoy yourselves. So the night after, or a couple of days after the accident, and walked in the Mine Action Centre, everyone was sort of shocked to see us come in. And I got a case of beer and put it on the table and said, you know, Bent would have wanted me to do this, so I'm buying a case of beer for you guys.
The danger of clearing mines can never be underestimated. With millions of mines planted in 70 countries, humanitarian demining is a global responsibility. In an effort to help, the U.S. government has a train-the-trainer program designed to teach other countries how to minimize the pervasive risk of demining and save civilian lives. Since 1993, the U.S. Army base at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, has been the location of a unique humanitarian demining program.
If it was a fragmentation mine, what would you expect to find within the local area?
You'll
find some type of scarring on the side of the trees, and you'll also find it in the victim itself.
This Train-the-Trainer course has assisted 37 countries in setting up their own demining organizations.
We don't go into a country and impose a program on them. It is always the host nation's program. Every program is tailored to the needs of the country, and there's no two countries that are alike. The terrain is different, the culture is different, the resources of the country are different.
The Department of State provides $30 to $40 million a year in funding for the equipment necessary for a successful demining operation in the enrolled countries. But it is at Fort Leonard Wood where Special Operations Forces soldiers are actually trained in the techniques of humanitarian demining. They will then be deployed to a specific country enrolled in the program. It is the job of these soldiers to train the instructors in that country in the dangerous process of demining.
The Department of Defense provides the training that the country needs. In other words, we train their instructors, we train their cadre in how to demine, and then they can train their own people, whether it's civilians or soldiers that the country uses. We also teach the country the organizational and management and leadership skills that the country needs to sustain that program.
Using the international standard for the process, these soldiers employ the same techniques and tools as in any humanitarian demining operation. The one exception is that soldiers in this program are taught to start in a prone position. It is the safest position to be in, as most of the lethal impact of an exploding mine will be over the head of a deminer on the ground. Usually operating under the pressure and speed of a military mission, these soldiers, training in humanitarian demining, must now follow very slow and subtle procedures.
Because they are the elite commandos, and everything one thinks of them as, rah, rah, let's go out and, do our commando mission and blow this up, or, take this hill, or whatever the case may be. And most of the public is not aware of all the other stuff that Special Operations does. And one of the key missions of Special Operations Forces is training other foreign militaries. And they just find this type of work very rewarding. You are doing something that has an immediate impact on the welfare of another group of people, on another nation.
This U.S. government program is unique in the world. It has ultimately saved the lives of civilians and assisted countries in the rebuilding process after a conflict. Although neutralizing a mine has depended on courageous individuals, the search for a safe alternative to a man on the ground has led the military to explore mechanized and high-tech methods of clearing a minefield.
Is the mine go get a marker?
As early as World War II, the military experimented with heavily armored tanks equipped with flails or rollers. These large tanks would charge through a minefield and detonate any mines in its path. When available, these mine plows were used to proof a minefield after combat engineers manually cleared it. Today, these modified tanks are still in use, but with a robotic attachment.
We've taken robotic components and added them inside an existing vehicle system. In the case of the main battle tank, we've had rollers on the front of it. The systems that have the robotic controls added in them can be used either manually, meaning driven by a human being, or in an unmanned capacity by the simple turning of one switch.
With a few exceptions, most of the large vehicle systems used in military mine breaching are too expensive or too impractical for humanitarian demining. But in Sarajevo, a mini flail, a more compact version of the tank flail, is used to clear an area with heavy vegetation before the deminers begin their work. In case the mini flail hit a mine, it was remotely controlled by deminers in an armored vehicle at least 50 meters away. The use of new technology for mine detection and neutralization is still in the early experimental stage.
In any detection system, we're trying to create a standoff capability, and what that means is being able to detect the mines without having to be in close proximity to it. And of course, the further away that you can do that, the better off you are. And so if we can increase those standoff distances between the soldier and the minefield, we can reduce the risk to the soldier.
With all the advances in mine detection and neutralization, it is still all too often a hazardous operation demanding courage and control under enormous pressure. With only the simple tools of a metal detector and a probe, men search for a sophisticated enemy. Whether in a battlefield or the field of a farmer, these weapons wait patiently for their next victim. Those who must clear minefields share common bonds that go beyond the danger. Both the tediously slow process of humanitarian demining and the breakneck speed of military mine breaching require a high level of concentration and commitment in the face of an intimate threat. And both are accomplished by brave individuals who will risk everything to give service to their country.
You clear an area, and before you're finished with the entire area, people start moving back in. They start to clear out their houses and come back. And the best thing about it is when you go back to a village, for example, 6 months after you've finished here, you can't recognize the place. It's a completely different area. And that is the kind of satisfaction I think that every of the deminers also get. And it's another reason to why they continue doing this.
Deep in every one of these soldiers' heart is the love for their country, and it's all about sacrifice. These soldiers are just great Americans. They just are serving their country. This is what their country's asking them to do in exchange for a few years of service, and it's a mission that has to be done in combat, and these folks are willing to do it.
In each place that people feel safe to go to, there was a deminer who was standing on his knees whole day and prodding and detecting and searching for mines, and he sacrificed his life almost to do that. That's noble, if I can say.